Hello, and welcome back to Afjer Audiobooks. Today, I'll be reading one of my all-time favorite series, starting with Book 1. This is Ranger's Apprentice, Book 1, The Ruins of Gorlan, by John Flanagan. All credit to the author. If you want to read more from John Flanagan, his name is spelled Johnflanagan. Trust me when I say that he is a fantastic author. Before we begin, keep in mind that I have little access to editing software and very little experience with editing, so this will definitely not be the best audiobook you've ever heard. Let us begin. Chapter 10. Time you learned what weapons you'll be using, said Halt. They'd eaten breakfast well before sunup, and Will had followed Halt into the forest. They walked for about half an hour, with the ranger showing Will how to glide from one patch of shade to the next, as silently as possible. Will was a good student in the art of unseen movement, as Halt had already remarked, but he had a lot to learn before he reached ranger standard. Still, Halt was pleased with his progress. The boy was keen to learn, particularly when it was a matter of fieldcraft like this. It was a slightly different matter when it came to the less exciting tasks like map reading and chart drawing. Will tended to skip over details that he saw as unimportant until Halt pointed out to him with some acerbity. You'd find these skills would be a little more important if you were planning a route for a company of heavy cavalry. I forgot to mention that there's a stream in the way. Now they stopped in a clearing, and Halt dropped a small bundle that had been concealed beneath his cloak. Will regarded the bundle doubtfully. When he thought of weapons, he thought of swords and battle-axes and war maces, the weapons carried by knights. It was obvious that this small bundle contained none of those. What sort of weapons? Do we have swords? Will asked, his eyes glued to the bundle. A ranger's principal weapons are stealth and silence, and his ability to avoid being seen, said Halt. But if they fail, then you may have to fight. So then we have a sword? Will said hopefully. Halt knelt and unwrapped the bundle. No. Then we have a bow, he said, and placed it at Will's feet. Will's first reaction was one of disappointment. A bow was something people used for hunting, he thought. Everyone had bows. A bow was more a tool than a weapon. As a child, he had made his fair share of them himself, bending a springy tree branch into shape. Then, as Halt said nothing, he looked more closely at the bow. This, he realized, was no bent branch. It was unlike any bow that Will had ever seen. Most of the bow following one long curve like a normal longbow, but then each tip curved back in the opposite direction. Will, like most of the people of the kingdom, were used to the standard longbow, which was one long piece of wood bent in a continuous curve. This one was a good deal shorter. It's called a recurve bow, said Halt, sensing his puzzlement. You're not strong enough to handle a full longbow yet, so the double curve will give you extra arrow speed and power, with a lower draw weight. I learned how to make one from the Temujai. Who are the Temujai? Asked Will, looking up from the strange bow. Fierce fighting men from the east, said Halt, and probably the world's finest archers. You fought against them? Against them and with them for a time, said Halt. Stop asking so many questions. Will glanced at the bow in his hand again. Now that he was becoming used to its unusual shape, he could see that it was a beautifully made weapon. Several shaped strips of wood had been glued together, with their grains running in different directions. They were of differing thicknesses, and it was this that achieved the double curve of the bow, as the different forces strained against each other, bending the limbs of the bow into a carefully planned pattern. Maybe, he thought, this really was a weapon after all. Can I shoot it? He asked. Halt nodded. If you feel that's a good idea, go ahead, he said. Quickly, Will chose an arrow from the quiver that had been in the bundle alongside the bow and fitted it to the string. He peeled the arrow back with his thumb and forefinger, aimed at a tree trunk some 20 meters away, and fired. Whack! The heavy bowstring slapped into the soft flesh on the inside of his arm, stinging like a whip. Will yelled with pain and dropped the bow as if it were red hot. Already a thick red welt was forming on his arm. It throbbed painfully. Will had no idea where the arrow had gone, nor did he care. That hurt, he said, looking accusingly at the ranger. Halt shrugged. You're always in a hurry, youngster, he said. That may teach you to wait a little next time. He bent to the bundle and pulled out a long cuff made of stiff leather. He slid it onto Will's left arm so that it would protect him from the bowstring. Ruefully, Will noticed that Halt was wearing a similar cuff. Even more ruefully, he realized that he'd noticed this before, but never wondered about the reason for it. "Now try it again," said Holt. Will chose another arrow and placed it on the string. As he went to draw it back again, Holt stopped him. "Not with the thumb and finger," he said. "Let the arrow rest between the first and second fingers on the string, like this." He showed Will how to knock. The notch at the butt end of the arrow actually clipped to the string and held the arrow in place. Then he demonstrated how to let the string rest on the first joint of the first, second, and third fingers, with the first finger above the knock point and the others below it. Finally, he showed him how to allow the string to slip loose so that the arrow was released. "That's better," he said, and as Will brought the arrow back, he continued. "Try to use your back muscles, not just your arms. Feel as if you're pushing your shoulder blades together." Will tried it, and the bow seemed to draw a little easier. He found he could hold it steadier than before. He fired again. This time, he just missed the tree trunk he'd been aiming for. "You need practice," said Holt. "Put it on for now." Carefully, Will laid the bow down on the ground. He was eager to see what Holt would produce next from the bundle. "These are Ranger's knives," said Holt. He handed Will a double scabbard, like the one he wore on the left-hand side of his own belt. Will took the double scabbard and examined it. The knives were set one above the other. The top knife was the shorter of the two. It had a thick, heavy grip made of a series of leather discs set one above the other. There was a brass crosspiece between the hilt and the blade, and it had a matching brass pommel. "Take it out," said Holt. "Do it carefully." Will slid the short knife from the scabbard. It was an unusual shape, narrow at the hilt, and tapered out sharply, becoming thicker and wider for 3/4 of its length to form a broad blade with the weight concentrated toward the tip. Then a steep reverse taper created a razor-sharp point. He looked curiously at Holt. "It's for throwing," said the Ranger. "The extra width at the tip balances the weight of the hilts, and the combined weight of the two helps drive the knife home when you throw it. Watch." His hand moved smoothly and swiftly to the broad-bladed knife at his own waist. He flicked it free from the scabbard and, in one smooth action, sent it spinning toward a nearby tree. The knife thudded home into the wood with a satisfying thunk. Will looked at Holt, impressed with the Ranger's skill and speed. "How do you learn to do that?" he asked. Holt looked at him. "Practice." He gestured for Will to inspect the second knife. This one was longer. The handle was the same leather disc construction, and there was a short, sturdy crosspiece. The blade was heavy and straight, razor-sharp on one side, thick and heavy on the other. "This is in case your enemy gets to close quarters," said Holt. Although if you're any sort of an archer, you never will. It's balanced for throwing, but you can also block a sword stroke with that blade. It's made by the finest steelsmiths in the kingdom. Look after it, and keep it sharp." "I will," the apprentice said softly, admiring the knife in his hands. "It's similar to what the Scanians call a sex knife," Holt told him. Will frowned at the unfamiliar name, and Holt went on to explain further. "It's both weapon and tool. A sea axe, originally, but over the years the words sort of slid together to become sax. Mind you," he said, "the quality of the steel is ours is a long way superior to the Scanian ones." Will studied the knife more closely, seeing the faint blue tint in the blade, feeling the perfect balance. With its leather and brass hilts, the knife might be plain and functional in appearance, but it was a fine weapon, and, Will realized, far superior to the comparatively clumsy swords worn by Castle Redmont warriors. Holt showed him how to strap the double scabbard to his belt so that his hand fell naturally to the knife hilts. "Now," he said, "all you have to do is learn to use them. And you know what that means, don't you?" Will nodded his head, grinning. "A lot of practice," he said. And that is the end of the chapter. Sorry I'm being a little more stuttery today, but thank you so much for listening. I'll see you in the next reading. Bye.